Well, welcome to the True Man Podcast. This is an invitation, a radical reconstruction of a man's masculine heart and soul, and a place of safe community where we dare to ask questions deep seated in a man and explore ways to help you become a better man, a better son, a better dad, and a better spouse. Well, thank you for being on the True Man Podcast today. Now, I think one of the biggest challenges I've faced as a parent is asking myself questions like, how do you know you're doing the right thing? Am I putting my children in the best position to succeed in life? Or maybe you're just wondering, where in the heck do I even start with this deal? Well, let's see if we can address that today with my guest, Jeff Nelligan. Jeff is the father of three boys and a commentator in the world of American parenting. And he is the author of the book, Four Lessons My Three Sons. How can you raise resilient kids? Boy, do we need to know about that right now. Jeff, thank you so much for being on the True Man Podcast.
Hey, Mike, it's a privilege, and I totally agree with the ethos that's behind the podcast. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Well, we're glad to have you. I think this is an important topic, and I think we all want to have resilient kids. I know I do. Lord knows they're growing up in, let's just say, a crazy environment, maybe worse than that. So, how did this all begin to percolate for you? Where did you kind of start with this whole idea? What I want to investigate some time and figure out how to be the best possible parent I can be.
Certainly, Mike. As we were speaking about earlier, I when you ask the question as you did in the opening, how can I be a better dad and a better man? The question is answered by having a plan and a strategy. These things, as wondrous as the Holy Spirit is, these things need to materialize in the individual.
Yeah.
And a strategy for raising your kids is essential, because if you don't have a strategy for raising your kids, girls or boys, you're letting the culture raise the kid. And I don't think there's a reasonable parent on this planet that thinks that that's a good idea. In approaching my own fatherhood, I had a strategy early on. And as the title of the book says, it was to raise resilient kids. That is, kids who could hit obstacles and setbacks, who had shortcomings, but who could elevate themselves to get around it or get over it, or somehow ameliorate it and continue to drive through life. Because as we know as parents, no one gets a free ride, adults and kids. And those challenges are going to come on a daily basis or a weekly basis. And the sooner a kid has the strength and the inner fortitude to address the obstacle and somehow get over it or flatten it, the better that kid is the next week, and then the next month, and then the next year, because that kid builds in them, almost a reflex muscle memory in meeting the challenge and getting over it.
Was it your military background that kind of led you to go, hey, I've got kids now. I got to create this plan, and I mean, and this I agree with you. I mean, if you don't have a plan or a strategy, you're winging it. Now, that would be true of every area of life, but
Right.
why would we take a chance on our children, which is what most people are doing?
Right. And, Mike, great point. Every area of our life, we have a strategy. I mean, obviously,
Yeah.
our professional lives, we just don't wake up and decide to go to work and take this job or that job with no thinking forward of what it's going to, result in. So, of course, you have to have a strategy for raising kids. It's in every endeavor of the rest of our lives. My own, path to this was when they were young. I decided there's certain values that they had to learn and that would last them throughout their lives. And in the book, the book it's very brief, it's very loose, it's funny, and it's about a 40-minute read. So it's no tabletop 350-pound anchor, full of gibberish. The four values are enunciated in the books. I wanted courteous, kids. I wanted kids that were confident in everything that they did. I wanted kids that were resilient in adversity. As I said earlier, adversity hits us every day.
Yep.
And the fourth one was I wanted kids with ambition, with true ambition to realize whatever their potential was. And so I set about, building the ways that they could achieve those things at an early age. And much of life for kids at that point is finding their place in the world. And I'm saying when they're 5 years old or 6 years old and gaining that confidence and courtesy. So I would give them, this started early, I would give them tests in the real world where right outside the front door, the malls, the schools, the neighborhood, the communities, the hardware store, volunteer opportunities. And the first test I gave them, which I thought was, would really kind of set the pace, is we were sitting in a big indoor mall, not unlike those in, Marietta or anywhere else.
Yeah.
And I took out my wallet and I gave each kid a $5 bill. And I said, go get the old man change. I said, this is not a race. I'm going to be standing right here, but you need to come back with $5 and change. And the eldest was 7 and the youngest was 4. And they were excited with the test. Strange place, huge milling crowds, new environment, and off they went. And they came back after some time. A couple kids, 2 of them struck out at the first store they went to. Another kid came back with 20 quarters in his pocket. But they were excited. They navigated this really new and unusual circumstance to produce the change. So that kind of test went on and on and on, all for years and years, but they were elevated. The eldest is, 8 years old. We're at a restaurant. I say, you memorize all the orders and tell the waiter what we want. And so every kid, every time we went out, was realizing, hey, am I going to be the one chosen to do this? And we're at an airport, and I hand some kid the paperwork and say, go get us 5 boarding passes. We'll be right here. You got to do it. There's no coming back with excuses. Or here's an ATM card. Go get the old man $300. Here's my password, And so you put those kind of tests to kids at young ages. And as I said earlier, achieving them becomes muscle memory, becomes a reflex. They're not panicked. And of course, it does have practical applications. The youngest kid is at a mall with a birthday party with 15 kids, and the irresponsible parents who are supposed to be managing this thing walk into a movie theater with 12 of them and leave 3 in the food court, one of whom's my son. And the 2 kids with them, they all 3 realize that they've been abandoned. The 2 kids with them are just start bawling.
Yeah.
And my kid says, wait a minute. My dad once told me at a college football game, if you get lost, you're too short to see anything. So just look for that guy with a stripe running down their pants. It's a soldier or a policeman or a security officer, and they'll help you. So finally they located one, went up and grabbed the guy's legs and said, hey, we're lost. The key thing was that reflex kicked in. The other 2 were dissolved into tears, but my kid doesn't panic. There's a way out. He knows there's a way out. So those are parts of that strategy, I mentioned earlier, in getting a kid to really be able to handle tough stuff. And the tough stuff never ends. I mean, kid who's 5 years old in a mall suddenly is 27 years old, and he's sitting on a guided missile destroyer in the middle of the Persian Gulf, and he's responsible for 250 guys. So guess what? The muscle memory with the dangers that he's facing at night kicks in just like it did when he was 7 years old.
I'm hearing you describe this, and I'm thinking, can I get a parent do-over? I think that I think I may have made not some good choices. It is really interesting because I'm sitting as you're telling that story, I was thinking, and anybody that's been to Atlanta, Georgia, and gone through Hartsfield Jackson Airport knows it's pure pure crazy. And
Yeah.
I've had a handful of times where I felt like I was disoriented in the
Yes.
work
Yeah.
and almost began to panic. But the point in me even saying that is that I didn't learn not to panic in the way that you're describing that you taught your kids, and we're always going to default to what we know, right? So
Yes.
I don't want to. I just made myself sound maybe a little freaky, but the point is, I mean, and you have to mentally train yourself as an. It's a lot easier to learn this. I guess my point is when you're a child versus an adult. Now I got to retrain myself.
Right. And one of your earlier guests, Liam Naden was talking about finessing.
Yeah.
You finesse the frustrations that you feel or the distress or whatever. You finesse it enough, and then you become less fearful of everything,
Yes.
whatever is going to happen to you, because you've done it so many times that you just figure, well, this is just another test and I'm going to get through it. The converse is kids who have parents, well meaning and sincere, who snowplow the kid through everything so that there is never a rocky point. There is never an obstacle that is not flattened by the parent. And what happens is, that enabling procedure results in all the opposites of the values I talked about earlier. The
Yeah.
kid is never confident. The kid is hardly courteous. The kid barely has ambition. And God, don't give him adversity because he's going to fold like a $3 suitcase. And as we spoke about earlier, I think that those elements are really present in our current generation, which I would describe as Gen Z, born 1970, 1997, 1978, and some of the youngest millennials. And, we were talking earlier, intergenerational snark has been with us since the time of Socrates.
Yeah.
The next
Yeah.
generation is never going to be able to pull off, what we did. Well, this generation, there's a thing called data, and there's numbers. We have numbers and facts and studies that show what this generation is doing. And this generation spends 8 hours and 47 minutes a day on a cell phone looking at social media.
Yeah.
Okay. And 9 hours a day in a passive environment looking at stuff, that's not healthy. And Jonathan Haidt in Anxious Generation, his recent book, has delved into that with more data than anyone could ever bring to the subject. You've got majority, 51% of kids between the ages of 18 and 32 still live with their parents.
Mm-hmm.
So when you talk about a strategy, what strategy did a parent have for a kid at the age of 5 that now he's 25 or she is 25, living in their basement, getting good at Minecraft? Where was the strategy? Well, there was no strategy. And what is the end game with that? And then, of course, you've got kids who get out of college, and 3 recent surveys, Market Watch, Resume Builder, and Forbes, note that kids who get out of college and are going for their first interview with the hiring manager, 1 out of 3 bring their parents to the interview.
Oh, I hadn't heard this. Really?
Yes. 1 out of 3 kids
Ooh.
recently graduated from college, age 23, 22, 24, bring their parents to the first interview they have for a job. Now, my gosh,
Yeah.
again, where was the strategy in raising a kid that at age 22 has to bring mom or dad to sit down for their first job interview? So that's what I mean about the numbers. The anecdotes are all out there. Every person above the age of probably 40 or 45 is always complaining about the younger generation. But the numbers kind of underscore that maybe those complaints are pretty valid.
So how do we reverse this trend? I mean,
Oh, yes.
the toothpaste is kind of out of the tube, as they say, isn't it? I mean, like, what do we do?
Well, there are ways to reverse the trend, and alas, they fall under almost the rubric of shock treatment. Parents should understand that 75% of the time they're going to spend with their boy or girl, and this is, I hope every dad who's got kids is listening to this very, very closely.
Yeah.
75% of the time that you will spend with your child is over by the time the kid is age 12. And 90% of the time you spend with your kid is going to be over by the age of 18. So you better start early in really understanding and guiding that child, because after a certain age, the control and the guide that you can provide them starts vanishing. Now, when I talk to parents and kids, they say, well, what are the actionable items? And Jonathan Haidt, who is, just a titan in the parenting and the social media realm. I have 3 actionable items. The first, if you come to me and you say, look, I've got a kid who's 9 years old, what do I do? The first thing you do is you take all the screens away. Yeah. Did I say shock treatment, Mike?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That would
take
be
all
shock
the screens
treatment.
away.
Yeah. That's shock treatment for adults in
right
this day and age.
And exactly, you're a prophet, because my next sentence was going to be, and you don't use your own phone within sight of them. So it's complete turn off of everything of the glowing rectangle. The second thing you do is an hour a day, you take that kid, 9 years old, and you walk him or her around the neighborhood or in a park or somewhere where they are getting the full measure of nature. The full measure of things that are outside their house, outside their room, outside their property, that they're seeing the real world and all of its, splendor. And so that they understand that there's something larger in life than 4 walls in a room. And the third thing is you read to them 1 hour a day. And if they can read, then you sit next to them and read something next to them. 3 actionable items. Again, shock treatment. But the question's always asked, what did I do? Well, I did those things when my kids were that age and younger. Yeah. And given their path through life and what they do now, United States Naval Academy, West Point, Williams College, 3 military officers, always in charge of hundreds of men and women and billions of dollars worth of equipment. That's how you can get that kid, and maybe as you began this segment saying, that's how you can reverse it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yesterday, the fact that it'll happen once we're done recording today. I just kind of every day, I have a calendar, and maybe some days I'll switch it up. But when I'm done today, I'm going to go outside. I'm going to go for a run. Now, the other day I was walking the dog, and this lady in my neighborhood comes running by me. Now she's got her kid in a stroller, and I thought, well, good. This is good. The kid's learning a good habit, right? Got to exercise and take care of your body. One problem there. The kid had an iPad,
right,
and was watching. I could hear it. I was watching it, and I thought, well, isn't that interesting? In one hand, you're teaching the kid a good habit. In the other hand, you got Mr. Babysitter, the computer,
right?
And I thought, man, isn't this where our society is? And is it any wonder that our children are just like messed up?
Well, precisely. And, there's another stat too. Kids between the ages of 3 and 5 suck up about 90 to 110 minutes of video every day off of a screen. 3 to 5. That's the average. And those are not Nelligan stats. Those are from the CDC, the NIH, and the Pew Foundation. Okay. Again, all the numbers are there to show what has happened. And that's why when you talk to parents who really want to make that change, you have to say, look, this is going to require some real hardship. I don't think it's hardship walking an hour or reading an hour or yanking a screen out of a kid's hands, but some parents might. But very good point. What's the point of taking your kids throughout a neighborhood run if he's looking at a tablet? I mean, come on, man. And
Yeah.
that's the kid. See, here's the thing, too. I went back to the 18 to 32. They're living at home, 51%. If you've got a kid at the age of 5 or 3 or 7 who's looking at that screen, there's a good chance one out of every two of them is going to be in that basement. Okay. And at that point, when a kid is 24, 25, or 26 in a basement, what's the end game? How does that turn around? Is that kid going to be suddenly some productive, individual at the age of 30 through osmosis, through magic? Come on, So it's a harsh thing to say, but you opened this whole segment by asking me how to be a better dad. Well,
Yeah.
here are ways you can be a better dad. No, maybe they're not easy to you, but what's the alternative?
Yeah. Well, now there. Well, okay. Now, if that question didn't hit you between the eyes, I'll tell you. It's. I remember my son's a junior in college now, or was going to be a junior this fall, and so really struggling with, well, I don't know what I want to major in. I don't know what I want to do. I don't know what I want to do. And we went through really all of these, trying to go through these tests and that type of thing. And I remember reading at that point, and there was some kind of statistic that said the top 10 most desirable jobs, and this would have been probably 4 or 5 years ago. I read this. The top 10 most desirable jobs didn't even exist just 10 years ago due to technology. And so, my point in saying that is, you know, I look back over my lifetime. I remember, when the whole, .com thing began to take charge in the late 90s and early 2000s, and technology began to take over. I remember being in the telecom industry, and we were actually talking about, data is going to replace tele. It's all kind of funny to me now. I laugh about it because at one point I was helping companies move from dial up to
Wow.
DSL. Whoa, which is just hysterical now. But I so vividly recall that technology shift that was made, and it's filtered into I believe our lives as parents in terms of being able to help our kids. How do we help our kids in an era where maybe now we're talking about AI? What does AI look like in 10 years? How does that shift the job market? How do we help our kids discern what's going on in with all this technology going on around us?
Well, if you know, I mean, you make a really good point. You're talking about the 2000.
Yeah,
That let's use that as a year of a marker. Um,
that's a good one.
in 2000, you know, Amazon was 3 years old
Yep.
and it was losing money.
Hmm.
And now 2024, quarter of a century later, there are 7 tech companies that have market capitalization over $1 trillion.
Right. Yep.
Okay. So that's the economic landscape. Uh, if your kid is coming to you a junior year to say, "Hey, what do I major in?" I mean, again, this is the hard sit down of tactics, and literally you sit down with them. And I've had this conversation with my kids when they were choosing a major in college. And I said, okay, what's your thoughts? And this occurred different periods of time, right before they left, in the midst, and in the midst of college. And one of my sons said, well, I think I'll major in Spanish. He's pretty talented in the language. And we were talking on the phone. He says, I got to make this decision within the next couple of weeks. And I said, again, now you're going to hear shock treatment, but guess what? I said, that's Spanish. I said, that's the old world language. You have all these different languages you could learn at Williams. Spanish, I said, you can talk to some of the domestics and all that. That's great. And
Yeah.
you'll be good at any intake center across the United States. But here's the deal. The new world, and this is what you were talking about earlier, is Asia. It's China.
For sure.
I said, why don't you, instead of Spanish, which is good and it'd be very useful for you, why don't you learn Mandarin? Because that's that's the future. I said, all you have to do is get C's. I don't care what your grades are, just get C's. You're smart enough to get enough of it. And the whole world's going to open up for you because there's just not too many Caucasian kids who play lacrosse, who are team captains, who speak Mandarin. Yeah. And of course, he took Mandarin and he did actually pretty well because, again, he's kind of a grinder. And he lived in Hong Kong. He lived in Taipei. He lived in Beijing. And the Mandarin has been a constant and super addition to his professional career. Another kid said, I'm thinking of majoring in history. And I said, what the hell? You're at the Naval Academy. History? I said, if you come over the house, I can just read you history books. I said, I know a lot about history. I said, but you're really good at math. I said, yeah, you get C's and B's, but that's what you really like. So that's what he majored in. And of course, it has been essential to his naval career. Okay. So you sit down with your son and say, we got to think this out. We got to write things down. We've got to formulate this plan. And, if you're thinking about majoring in anthropology and archaeology, wrong answer, because that's not going to take you very far. Yeah. And maybe that's tough to hear, but that's the conversations you have to have.
Well, but I think, and this is just the way I'm being taught, and a lot of people don't understand the difference nowadays. Firm but fair.
Yes.
Yeah. And there's it's funny. I try to make sure I understand that, but there are a lot of people out there that don't understand. And there are a lot of parents that don't understand that firm doesn't mean angry. Firm means firm.
Well, right. And there's a reason they call it parenting and not childing. Okay? If a kid's coming to you with a question about something, give them the truth. Be authentic. One of your guests was talking about authenticity, Scott Jennings. Yeah. Lay it on the line. There's no need for subterfuge or feelings, anything like that. These are major decisions. You got to go into them cold as ice and hard as a hammer. So when you sit down with them, maybe you say, okay, here's the deal. What do you like? And don't tell me you don't know. Figure it out before we sit down, because we need to, you are burning daylight in college and you've got to find something. And even if it's something you're 80% interested in, do it, because there's no such thing as perfection. Right. I always would tell my kids, don't worry about being perfect. Just, the football analogy, just move the chains every day. Yeah. You'll get downfield. You're never going to get that long bomb in the end zone. And that's not a way to live life. It's just grinding it out. So maybe that's what you say with your kid. Now, listen to me. I'm a total stranger and I'm giving you advice about your child, but I'm just saying that's how I handled it.
No, it's important. I think this is how we learn. So, you brought up S.J. Scott. S.J. and I were really talking about authenticity and vulnerability, primarily because, at their retreats and the things that Zoe puts on to help support men, that's where, I've had to do the work, right? There was a point where I had to go look in the mirror and go, what the hell are you doing with your own life? Because the reality is it's pretty hard to turn to your children and go, and this is what exactly what I experienced. At a certain point, when my kids were very, very young, I was saying to my children, we never used the term daycare. We always used school. I mean, when they were their entire lives, because we wanted to stress education. And at a certain point, I had to go look in the mirror and go, Mike, you did not complete your education. What are you going to do about it? Because you're a hypocrite. And I went back and I I got my undergraduate, I got my graduate degree, and now when I'm talking about education, I can talk about it very seriously. Now, I wish I'd done it right the first time, but the point is I'm not a hypocrite. I'm dead
Yeah.
serious because and I think this is largely what we're talking about here, at least what I see in our culture. The gap between the haves and the haves nots, if we want to put it that way, is widening. It's widening because some people, I believe, will take the approach and there's too much crap on TV right now about, oh, well, college is expensive. Hell yeah, it's expensive. And I can give you a number of reasons why it's expensive. But the point is, if you go get an education versus a person who doesn't because it's expensive, you're going to fall behind. Your chances of success, you've limited yourself, in my mind. And
Right.
and so, like how it worked, it's going to work out fine for our son. He's a highly creative person. He's going to land something in the arts, which is where it all started in the first place. And so that's what he loves. That's what he loves to be a part of. And he's highly skilled and creative in that area. And so he'll be fine doing, it's all going to work out. But we've told him, similar to what you're talking about, son, if you can get an A, get an A. That's awesome. I mean, the better your grades, the better off you're going to be. But go get that piece of paper right now, and you're going to elevate yourself ahead of people who are running around crying on social media because nobody's going to give them an opportunity because they don't know how to create their own. And so,
Yeah.
is that tough talk? Maybe we're at a time and a place where we need tough talk, and and,
Well,
and that's how
yeah.
I look at it. I mean, as doing what I'm doing, and that's what this podcast is all about. I'm going to give authentic, tough talk because we need it.
Well, I couldn't agree more. Uh, I'll I'll tell you a story that was in the book that elicited outrage from everything from NPR to Parenting Magazine. My kid told me in 10th grade, he said, Dad, I want to be a teacher and a coach. And I said, I didn't say a word. I said, well, that's very good. He'd grown up in an environment of great teachers and great coaches. They were
Yeah.
in private school where every teacher is vested in a kid, and is not worried. These poor public school teachers who have it so rough. I
Yeah.
mean, teachers are heroes in this
Yeah.
country, and
Yeah.
no one gives them the due that they
Sure.
deserve. And he said, but I want to become a coach and teacher. And I thought at the time, and didn't explode in typical Nelligan fashion. I said, okay. And then about 2 weeks later, I had all of them in the car after a lacrosse game. And I said, okay, we're going to take a little journey. So I took them to way at the end of the county to kind of a neighborhood that was, let's call it, lower income.
Mm-hmm.
And we drove in, and, there's cars on blocks, and the homes are sidings peeling off. There's toys everywhere and debris. And at one corner, there's a bunch of guys sitting around pulling, taking pulls on beer cans and smoking. And the kids they're transfixed. And, they're whispering. The windows are open. They're whispering. They're almost in a little bit of terror. And they said, Dad, why are we here? And we're driving by this landscape. And I said, I'll tell you why. Because if you become a teacher, these people will be your neighbors.
Wow.
And
Yeah,
it
it's
was
true.
shocked. I said, let me tell you something. I said, no one likes teachers better than me. Your grandparents were teachers. Your two uncles are teachers. But the teacher life is rough. You don't make very much money. And it's a tragedy that you teachers don't. And I said, you're used to a home on an acre of land in a neighborhood full of people who work every day, go to a private school, have everything you need and virtually everything you want. And that's not the life that you're going to have if you become a teacher or a coach. I said, I'm just giving it to you. And of course, I ended this by driving over to a pal's of mine house who lived on the Chesapeake Bay for a neighborhood event we were having. And of course, the kids didn't say a word the whole drive over. They were just, as I said, in shock.
Yeah.
And of course, I took massive heat from their mom, and then of course when I put it in the book, just explosions of outrage. And I had said it, but I had said in the book, teachers are priceless to this country. They just don't get treated well. But see, you talk about a hard lesson, and every parent should have that kind of talk with their kids. You're used to this, this wonderful lifestyle that we have. And if you become a teacher, you're going to be renting one of those shacks, and there's going to be no way out. Now, is that tough? Man, let me tell you.
I'm right there with you. Listen, I've tried to have some of these tough conversations over the years, and it's usually ended in something like, Mike, not everything's political. And I'm like, it damn near is. It damn near is. And so, I've tried to have a lot of hard discussions, and without getting too far in the news, it's funny how things play out. It's funny how things play out when you have to have some of these tough talks, because there's so much embedded in our culture that one way or another lands close to you in DC, where we're talking about public policy on a wide range of things. Social media is public policy, for gosh sakes. I mean, we're talking about TikTok all the time, right? What are we going to do with TikTok? And it's our kids are not only looking at social media that's goofy, but they're in I mean, I know I got two young kids. They're on TikTok. I'm on TikTok. And essentially China's spying on me. There's no two ways around it, And so, a lot of the things that, I tend to talk about in one way or another relate to public policy. But above and beyond that, I think that sometimes, as I've experienced as a father, when you have those tough talks, sometimes people are not always on the same page with you. That could include your wife, and I think it's probably important to have those conversations in advance,
Well, precisely. If the Smiths next door had that conversation with their kid, he wouldn't be in the basement. He wouldn't have taken 7 years to not get a college degree. You see, that's what I'm saying. Choices have consequences, and they have consequences when the kid is young and the parents either don't want to or don't think of having those hard conversations. So when you're talking to a 15-year-old kid and you say, we're in this kind of ghetto or slum, this is what you got to look forward to if you make this decision. I'm not sugarcoating this for you. This is where it ends, man. The average median salary for a teacher in this country is about 67 to 68K a year. Okay. Now, plenty of teachers make more than that, but even at 100,000, you're 35 years old and you're making 80K a year. Where are you going to live? What's your lifestyle going to be like? So the choices do have consequences, and they can be severe.
Yep.
And I'll tell you something else too. I mean, talk about authentic. And this is in the book too, and again, it kind of elicited some outrage around DC, as around downtown Atlanta. There's hundreds of big office buildings, 20, 30 stories tall. And then even if you get out in the suburbs, there's all these office parks. And when we drive around these areas in DC, we were always transfixed by the size of these buildings, just looming steel, glass, iron, brick monoliths, And and we would just always look at it. One day we were down DC, and I said, I figured I was going to make a point because this is the way I was with them. Every time with Dad, they were going to, kind of get thrown off balance. I said, up in the seventh floor of that building right there that is next to us, I said, there's a guy sitting there at a desk in front of a computer screen. And on the wall is a picture of his family. And on his desk is a coffee mug like you made me in second grade ceramics. And I said, you know, this guy's staring at this screen and he was going to be somebody. He was going to be a jet pilot, or he was going to own a chain of restaurants, or he was going to be in real estate. He was going to sail around the world. Instead, he's looking at this screen and he's saying, what in the hell am I doing here? I said, that guy is your dad. So you have got to get much, much farther than I did. And of course, again, the shock. And wow. But that's the way kids learn.
Yeah, and
bring in the honesty and the truth about even a guy that is their father that they look up to. I mean, they understand.
Yeah, I mean, when you're describing that, I couldn't help but laugh because that's that's the average dude. That's the average guy right there. And
right.
It doesn't mean that we're lifeless, but I mean, it's it's why I'm trying to do what I do and spread the word, because as other men, at the point where you're in that office and you go, what the hell have I done with my life? I mean, now you're isolated and alone. Now, what kind of decisions are you making? And they're typically not good decisions. And so, I think we need to understand that, sometimes the guy in the cubicle next to you or the office next to you he might be thinking the same doggone thing.
Right.
But
yeah. And in my jobs, I mean, I've been fired like 4 or 5 times in politics because, you lose an election and you're gone.
Yeah.
The next day they're saying, clean out your desk in 2 weeks. And so when this has happened, and I've sat my kids down saying, hey, the old man just lost his job. I got fired. And the first time it ever happened, I said, we're out playing football at the local high school. We're throwing the balls back and forth. And I said, hey, man, go long. I'm going to hit you. And after that, go get the donuts, because that's what we did every Sunday after this routine. And so I'm winding up to throw this rainbow downfield. And the eldest kid shrieks at me. He goes, Dad, you got fired from your job. We can't afford donuts.
Wow.
And I said, so I said, okay, everyone sit down in my office on the 50-yard line. We're going to talk this. And we sat down. I said, look, man, it's the end of the world. Ha, ha, ha. Very sardonic. End of the world. I said, yeah, I've got fired. But your dad, he'll rally. I got you to keep me company. I got to work on my throwing arm. And it's going to be fine.
Yeah.
Because this is the way life works. Yeah. And of course, again, a little bit of shock from them. But they use that, it's the end of the world, as a rallying cry for anything that happened to them. And they did it in the sardonic way and fashion that I had done it. You spill a gallon of milk on the kitchen floor. Oh, it's the end of the world. You get a D. Oh, it's the end of the world. You're in a bad social situation. End of the world. It gave them a way to pop the drama balloon and move forward, again, hitting that adversity and summoning that resilience. And so those tough conversations, you got to have them. And what they do is they strengthen and harden the kid, and at the same time show them that, Dad's failed at this or that. I got to use this because I don't want to fail. There you go. Again, it's another tough, like I've given you 3 very tough stories. That's the way it works.
I think you did something right. You got 3 boys that are leading this country, and God bless them and Godspeed to them as they lead, other men and women and support our country and in a world that just seems like it's gone to hell. It's good to know that at least 3 boys were raised right and they're out there supporting our country. So God bless them. And and Jeff, as we end today, tell everybody, and I'll of course put all this in the show notes, but tell everybody how can they get a hold of the book and get a hold of you if they want to learn more about what you're doing.
Certainly. My website is www.nelliganbooks.com. My LinkedIn is Jeff Nelligan. Facebook is Jeff Nelligan Books. Instagram is Nelligan_books. And my Twitter account is Resilient Sons. And so the book and blogs and podcasts about what we've talked about today are all
Yeah.
available there. And I just like to say, Mike, it's good that you're having these kind of conversations with, the guys you had on your show. And I've listened to at least half a dozen all the way
Thank you.
through, because what you're doing is you're giving dads, and I hope the dads are listening here. You're giving me another angle in looking at parenthood and looking at society. And it's an angle they don't often get. And yeah, I've just related, three kind of disturbing stories, but life is disturbing.
Yes.
And the way to get over that is to admit it and confront it and get over it. So
Yep.
what you're doing for these dads is, as I say, giving them that kind of voice that they're not going to hear anywhere else. And so good for you.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. That was the goal. It's been this has been part of my transformation of my life. And again, when I found out, oh, I can be real and authentic, and
Right.
guess what? Other men are looking for that too. They just don't necessarily know how to go about it, or where can we have these real conversations. And so,
Right.
that's been my goal from the get-go. And I look forward to what the future holds and how we can expand this and take it further, and really talk about masculinity and men from a real perspective, not that Hollywood BS that they get
Yeah.
sometimes on television, or you know this isn't snowflake stuff. And so,
No,
yeah,
no.
I don't
Right.
I don't
Exactly.
this is serious stuff. It really is a matter between life or death, or how people are raised, so
Yeah.
and the enemy for sure is real. And what the enemy knows is, if he can take the father out of the family, then he can
Right.
take the family down. And men, you need to be aware of that, because it's hard to raise a good family if you've been taken out. And
And it goes back to like what we first began with. You raise the kid, you engage, you make the hard choices, you take the time, you
yeah,
yank the phones and the screens. Otherwise, the culture raises the kid.
yep, there it
And
is.
that's what you said about taking away the father. The culture raises it, not the dad.
Yep. We gotta get back to grassroots family support, and dig our heels in on that, because
Right.
a lot of other people have control over your family right now, whether you believe it or not. So,
Exactly.
Jeff, thank you for being on the True Man podcast. I really enjoyed our conversation.
You bet. Hey, man, it's great talking to truly a true man in Mike. I appreciate you having me, and it's been a great pleasure.
All right. Thank you.